So Dan Coe dropped a video the other week, about 4 weeks ago, around Ken Wilber's stages and integral theory. And he did a pretty good job. It was a 23-minute video. He did a pretty good job of explaining it in 23 minutes. I mean, Ken Wilber's body of work is extensive. Trying to explain in 23 minutes is challenging. I think he did a pretty good job. There are some things, though, I think that were absolutely left out. I'm sure he would agree with that. And there are some things that I'm going to talk through today so that you can actually digest it easier. And then on top of that, be able to actually use it and apply it straight away, cross-contextually. It doesn't matter whether it's at work or at home or on the sporting field. And I'm going to go through three parts. One is his quadrant work, so his integral quadrants. The next is the stages of consciousness. I'm going to go through that as well. And then I'm going to go through something a little bit different, which is the identity compass or Michael Hall's meta programs. And they're two different things, but they overlap, and there's a reason why. And I'm going to share with you how you can use all these straight away. On top of that, I'm going to actually share a bit of a critique of Wilber's work, actually done by Mark Manson. So, which I found interesting when I first came across it. But my background, I actually was introduced to Ken Wilber's work through the Coaching Room. The Coaching Room is an institute here in Australia that I've done majority of my study through for the last 8 years. I first went to the Coaching Room to do NLP prac, which is neuro-linguistic programming prac. I actually found myself not wanting to do NLP prac, even though I was first introduced to it, I think when I was 19. And for context, I think I was 28 when I did NLP prac. And I bought actually Joseph O'Connor's book, which is the NLP workbook. I'll have it there somewhere. There it is. NLP workbook. This was the second book that I bought for $38.50 back in, that would have been 2008. And I started to read it, didn't make sense of it. It wasn't until later on that I sort of got a lot out of it. One of the challenges I had with neuro-linguistic programming was just how salesy it felt, how false it felt, fake it felt, how rah-rah it felt. I couldn't get into it no matter what sort of different type of, institutes I came across. So I never actually studied it until I came across the Coaching Room. And then my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she's like, I booked us in to do this course with the Coaching Room. I was like, sure, no worries. I just got back from America. I went there 3 years in a row to go study with a bunch of different trainers. I actually interviewed and trained with a variety of different coaches over there, from Westside Barbell through to C.T. Fletcher, through to Jay Marinake up in New York, right through to Nick Shaw from Renaissance Periodization, and wrote about all those guys. And so I was ready to do some learning, and the Coaching Room are fantastic. I still do some work with them now today. But the Coaching Room, the beauty of their NLP, which I didn't know at the time, is they teach it from an integral perspective. And so they do a lot of work. They do a lot of work through integral, an integral approach. And they did a lot of work through Integral Coaching Canada, among other integralists, so to speak. And so that's how I was first introduced to Ken Wilber's work. And it should be used as a guiding concept as opposed to the Bible. And I think that's where a lot of people get unstuck. Is that stuck and unstuck really, is that they try and treat it like just this is the only body of work. I use it as a meta model. I'm going to expand on that today and how you can use it as well. However, I went on to study NLP prac, Master prac, a thing called Associate Certified Meta Coach, which is actual Michael Hall's system, which is a really, really beautiful system, limiting all over again. And they see NLP as limiting. They only see it as up to the third perspective, which I'll expand on a little bit today. Useful. And incomplete, which, just like this video and every other video, all of it is useful and incomplete, true and incomplete in Wilber's words. And from there, I did their integral coaching, professional coaching pathway. And on top of that, I've gone through a bunch of Wilber's work through Ecology, spirituality, his religion of tomorrow, integral life practice, a whole bunch of this sort of stuff. My background as well, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, I've worked in the fitness industry for 21 years. I have had my own gym for the last 14 years. It's a private facility. And I've worked with about 10,000 people during that period. And that's from, one-on-one stuff, which I haven't done a lot of. I've done a lot of more small group stuff, anywhere between 5 to 10 people at any given time. So I've managed to see a lot of people move, but I've also had to be able to have thousands and thousands of conversations. I've also worked with elite athletes around the world on how they structure their thinking and how to approach certain situations, how to perform at their best, and more recently, including things such as understanding our nervous system and breath work into physical and mental performance, and doing that with from athletes right through to everyday mums and dads that just want to be present in the moments that matter. So that's in a snapshot my background. I am a well-being and performance specialist. It's what I do day to day. However, this sort of helps act as intellectual property and operates in the background. And it also is influenced, if you see my other work on the Boss Fit Matrix, this work has heavily influenced that work as well. So what I came to recognize before I knew Wilber's work was that people started to develop through stages. And I had different terms for it at the time. Later on, I saw Wilber's work, whose work is on top of other people's work. And I realized that it mapped across. So I'll briefly, if it ties in today, I'll explain that as well. But I've got some notes here on the computer. I've got a camera overhead, so there's some drawings that I might do, and I'm going to share some photos and shots with you as well. So starting with Dan's video. So Dan's video was how to think like a genius. That was the thumbnail. I can't recall specifically. I should know the title of the video. Let me find it here. Where is Danco? So, by the way, Colin, this is what you cut out. So the title of his video was "This Mental Model Will Make You Think Like a Strategic Genius." So, and I would suggest that's true and incomplete. So, but how geniuses think. Interesting. So you can imagine this as being how do geniuses think 2.0. He made a lot of really good points in his video. The challenge that with something like Wilber's work is that when it's first introduced, and he probably talks about stages, especially stages, and colors rather than levels, so that it's not seen as better or worse, people can get a little bit lost on it and it gets a bit rah-rah. And I can see why. However, if you spend a lot of time with it, and rather than drinking the Kool-Aid of it, looking at it as how is this a useful map, and maybe where is it not as useful, and seeing it as in, it's one of the struggles I have when people go, oh, I don't understand the book that I'm reading. It's like all of it, every single word, are you trying to understand it? Are you actually reading it going, what is the author saying here? I don't understand that phrase, let me Google it, let me read. Are you studying the book as you go, or is it just like, oh, I'm not at the stage of understanding this, I'm just going to let it go? And I think sometimes people can do that with bodies of work like this, rather than going, let me understand it to the level that I can, and understand that there's certain things that he's saying that I won't be able to understand. And there's certain things that he's saying that maybe later on won't be true, and are also filtered with his own frames of reality. Of course, I mean, that's the human condition. No matter who you are, that's always going to be filtered with frames of reality, and no one's immune to that. And that's the beauty of this all. So it is, let's call it God's work. And when I mean God, I mean like you are God, right? You're the universe. So it is just this opportunity to be able to learn on the shoulders of giants and integrate their learning, as opposed to just taking their maps of reference and applying it to yourself and going, this is the truth. That's not what any of this is about, including anything that I share. I'm like, here are some useful maps. Here's how I found use of them. Here's how I've applied them. If they're useful for you, great. If they're not, great. So Dan went through and explained a little bit of it. I think it's great how he did, although he missed a few things that I'm going to expand on today. But also, he would have done the same training that I've done, which means that I've come at the integral approach from a coaching lens. And coaching is different to training, and people can commonly mix this up. Training is teaching a skill. Coaching is holding the client as the expert in their subject, because the subject is them, and being able to ask questions without any judgment on what the answers should be or could be as they arise. And so the questions that you're asking as a coach is not leading, it's actually opening up for the person's potential. And what that means is not going, I'm going to show you potential. It's like, as a coach, I'm going to ask questions on behalf of you understanding yourself better. But the questions I'm asking are on behalf of the answers that you're providing, as opposed to a specific preset set of questions. Now I'm running an agenda, and you're answering based on my agenda. You're the expert, I'm following you. So there's a couple of key differences with coaching and training. They're different fields. And so there's a couple of key things here. The three frameworks that I'm going to go through, as I already mentioned, is going to be Wilber's Quadrants, then it's going to be stages, and then it's going to be something called the identity compass. And that's a mixture of Arne Maus, his work, and a guy called Dr. Michael Hall. There's also another lady, and I've got one of her books here that I haven't actually read her book yet. She goes through a lot of other meta programs, thinking patterns, intention to cognitive intentions. It all means the same sort of thing, slight differences. But I'm going to go through that a little bit more later on in this video and how it actually relates to the stages and also the quadrants. My goal for you though is that you're walking away with this with some principles. And think of principles as frames of reference that set trajectory, and protocols. And when protocols are actually executed on, that's your traction. So we want trajectory and traction, and it's got to be relevant for you, not relevant for me. So you're the viewer. So first things first, let's have a look at a critique of Wilber's work. Now there's a few critiques, and so there should be, like anything. And one of the biggest ones that I see, and this guy's massive in the self-help space, is Mark Manson. Now I've got a couple of his books behind me. I remember reading his book, The Subtle Art of Giving Fuck. In fact, I remember reading his article before he wrote the book that blew up. And this would have been back in 2016 or something like that. And so Mark Manson has some really good parts, but I think when looking at his, and I'll put these links down below as well, when looking at his critique, the biggest critique that he had from my perspective wasn't so much the actual body of work that Wilber's done. It was far more on the movement itself. It was the movement under-delivered. And so one of the key things that I'd offer you within this is don't get lost on what's always wrong with certain bodies of work. Look at what's right and useful, and disregard the rest. There's actually a quote by Wilber somewhere, I'll find it, who said the exact same thing. It's like, look for what's true and just pass on the rest. And that may be different at different stages of your life, and that's okay. This is a continual unfolding. It's not meant to be right. It's meant to be for right now, and that's different. So it really, his conclusion more than anything, and there was a couple of critiques, I'm not going to make the video too much about it, but it was mostly that the map itself is brilliant. And I would suggest that I think the map is profound for many reasons. And at some point, I'm looking forward to the stage of my life where I can be like, well, this is where it's really missing stuff, and this is my critique of it. I'm there in a little bit, but at the moment, this is an exceptionally useful map, and it's something that I teach every single week in multiple contexts, from CEOs right through to athletes, right through to, once again, mums and dads that are wanting to be present. It's the stuff that we integrate into the way that I run my business, my private training facility, as well as the way that I run my immersions. So it's a profound map. And when I say map, I'm talking about the quadrants, and I'm talking about the stages of consciousness. So the map is brilliant, the movement is under-delivered, and I think that's fair. I think any body of work can be useful, and you. So I'm going to give you an example, and this is going to be a funny example. A lot of you may not realize, but if you want to spend some time on YouTube, you'll be able to find it. In Canberra, ACT, where I live in Australia, every summer there's a thing called Summernats, which is a car show, and the cars that come are beautiful. And more often than not, when there's criticism of Summernats, it's not because of the cars. It's because of the fans. It's because of the followers. So the cars are brilliant, but the movement can sometimes cause the problems. So keep that in mind as you unfold and figure this out for yourself as well. All right, let's get into it. So there's Ken Wilber's Quadrants. I'm going to find a little image of it. Look, if I ever reference Cullen in any of my videos, he's my man. He does all my editing. He's the bro. He's absolutely my right-hand man. He's great. So if I speak into the camera and I say, hey, Cullen, can you put this up? I'm speaking to him so that he can actually put that up and go from there. So he's going to put the quadrants on the screen somewhere, and this is going to give you a bit of a snapshot of what I'm talking about when I talk about the quadrants. And so basically, Wilber sat in a cabin in Colorado for a few years, and he's got a far extensive background than that, but he sat in a cabin in Colorado for a few years, and he wanted to pull apart every single ismology, and he did it from the approach of like, in which way are these people right? And it was this idea of, there's all of the isms and ologies, and from spirituality to psychology to evolution to politics to all sorts. Like, which way are they true and correct, and which way are they partial and incomplete? And what he found was that they were coming from different perspectives. So everything from Jungian psychology to cognitive behavioral therapy to Marxism to feminism to political structures that are in the Western world versus the Eastern world, to all sorts. And he does speak about this at length through a lot of his texts. And so to get the most out of Wilber's work, I really believe there is a value in both reading his stuff, wanting to understand what the author is saying, and then being around individuals that are familiar with it so you can have discussions to pull it apart. Fortunately for me, that's the environment that I was first introduced to Wilber's work with. If you just grab his book off the shelf and try to read it, I mean, you're going, just take some mushrooms, mate, because you're going on a fucking journey. So, but useful nonetheless. And so when we look at the quadrants, you'll see that there is a upper left, a lower left, an upper right, and a lower right. And there's many different facets and ways that you can pull these apart. And I'm going to give you a couple today. But first, I'm going to go through and explain what they are. Then I'm going to give you some principles on how to approach it. Then I'm going to give you some ways that you can use it in context. And so the reality of these 4 quadrants is that all 4 quadrants are actually coexisting. They're existing at the same time. And the terminology there is that it's tetra-arising. What that means is that the first quadrant, the I space, that is your inner reality. That's your thoughts, your feelings, your memories, how you code your time. It's how you structure your thinking. And this is, for example, I talked about NLP before. This is where NLP is actually quite useful, because NLP at its best is the study of the structure of subjective experience. And so that can allow us to map out our inner reality, our upper left quadrant, pretty well for something that's actually subjective in nature. It is not objective. And oftentimes we try and objectify what's subjective. We're trying to look at, in Wilber's words, we're looking at it rather than looking in it. And in it is meaning, intention, it is value, it is belief, it's thoughts. And that's your upper left, your inner experience, your first person experience. You're having a first person experience this moment, I'm having one of this moment, so on and so forth. Your second quadrant is a we space. It is the collective subjective. If the upper left is the individual subjective, then the lower left, the we space, the second quadrant, is a collective subjective. And the beauty of the collective subjective is that this is our shared values. It is also unspoken assumptions, which, by the way, is a culture. But this is really where culture and the understanding of communication comes in. The common place of how the second quadrant is explained, it's the way of sharing. So if you're listening to this right now and your first response was, oh, that's a good way to see things, then you may lean into the quadrant, because we do have a bias. I'm going to explain that shortly. You may lean into the quadrant 1, where you're like, that's a good way to see things. If you're thinking about, oh, this is going to be good for everyone at work, then maybe you're considering how you're going to share this. And maybe your driver quadrant is going to be second quadrant, which is culture, it's community, right? Which is a common unity. And so the values that we hold here, unspoken or not, even when someone goes, it's a toxic workplace, that's a culture. I'm always curious, well, what was your role there? But our ability to actually access both first and second are subjective in nature. They are true, but they are a subjective truth. And so this is where if somebody's telling the truth, they're oftentimes telling their truth, which is sincerity, rather than the truth, which is third quadrant, I'll get to shortly. The beauty of the second quadrant is if I said to you, Cullen really supports me, my man behind the camera, he's not behind the camera, but if I say he really supports me, and you're like, hey, that's awesome, can you put that support in a wheelbarrow? And I pick up Cullen and put him in a wheelbarrow, you're like, that's Cullen, that's not support. Support is an intersubjective truth. And Cullen's like, I absolutely support him. And there may be certain behaviors or systems or ways that I've interpreted myself that influence that, because no quadrant exists by itself. They all exist at the same time. They're all different perspectives. And I'm going to give you some examples when I go through it. Your third quadrant is your individual exterior, your upper right. This is your physical body. It is your brain. It is your muscles. It is your behaviors, your habits, the way you dress, so to speak. If communication, the understanding exists within second quadrant, the actual act of communicating, that what I'm doing right now is a behavior, it's speech, it exists in the third quadrant, the upper right. And so the values that we have here now of being able to see this is now we've got a first person perspective, our inner reality, a second person shared perspective, and now we've got a third person physical perspective. Now, if the first person is way of seeing, and second person is way of sharing, then third person is way of doing. And so if you have a strong drive for the third quadrant, then you're likely listening to this be like, that's all well and good, but what do I do with this? How do I use this? This is action. Let's get things done. Let's go. Right? The vibes are off. It's usually, people think that's second quadrant, but it's usually a perception of their own third quadrant. So this is your physical body and behaviors. So right now it's literally my speech, the way I'm breathing, the way I'm moving. The shared values is me talking with you and doing my best to share an idea with you so you and I can be on the same page. And then I'm sharing insights from my own first person experience perspective. They're the three quadrants so far. Then you have the fourth quadrant. And the fourth quadrant is the collective exterior. And these are all of the systems and things and its that make up the environment. So in the example of this video right now, it is the software of YouTube that allows you to watch it. It is the hardware of the camera, of the microphone, of my background, of my books. It is all of the things, the collective structure of things that connect everything together. And funnily enough, it's commonly seen that this is a functional fit, which is also ironic because my business is called Functional Fitness. It's called Funk, but yeah, that's pretty funny. So your fourth quadrant there is this a functional fit? How do these things functionally fit together? And so more often than not, social systems as an example can fit there. So they're your four quadrants. And if we look at the first one being way of seeing, second one being way of sharing, third being way of doing, your fourth is a way of checking. How do we like check things off? Like what's the system? What's the procedure? What's the run sheet, right? Your fourth quadrant is the event organizer. And the person reading the poetry might be the person that's dominant in the first quadrant. So all of these quadrants are just as important as each other. We ourselves, we start to value certain quadrants for different reasons, and it can dominate our perspective. And it's not until we learn why we value certain things that we can really start to gain and develop a greater perspective. And there's many different ways that we can explain why people might value certain things, but what I am going to share with you here is that as a general rule, out of those four quadrants, you have one that's a driver perspective. We call it a native perspective. And that means that a first or a second or a third or a fourth, that drives your way of seeing the world. My father-in-law, he's not even a father, he's a father to me. He's a good man and he's a brilliant mind and he's an engineer. And his value is heavily around the like physical world and how things fit. He's got such an exceptional mind and it's not how I grew up whatsoever at all. And, admittedly as an adult, I'm learning how to build fences. I'm learning how to put things together, stuff that was never taught to me as a kid. Whereas me growing up, I remember being 12 and loving poetry. And I learned not to tell people because apparently as a 12-year-old, chicks didn't dig guys that loved poetry. But I did. And some of my favorite poems I remember from back that time. And so this world that I grew up in, there's many different reasons why I ended up spending a lot of time by myself, even though I was born into a family of 6. After the 10 years, I moved to the coast in a small country town with my mum and her partner at the time and just me. And then they split up and my mum had her own challenges and I was really left to just learn how to be with myself. And so I started to really value my inner reality, how I thought and how I structured things. I also really missed a family. And so I got really good at learning how do I connect with people? How do I build a community? How do I be part of something? How can I contribute? How can I listen? How can I understand? And so my quadrants that I became really strong in were my first and second. And my third and fourth quadrants are ones that were lagging. And I didn't realize this until much later on. And being able to learn what your drivers are and what your blind spots are gives a framework of like, well, your potential doesn't lie in your strengths. Your potential lies in your blind spots. It lies in the areas that are underdeveloped that actually enhance your capacity to do your genius work. And so we have a driver perspective. We have another perspective that we have access to. For me, like I just mentioned, first, and then I had access to second quadrant, especially because I moved around schools a lot. So I spent year 5 at one school, year 6, 7 at one school, year 6 at another school, then 7, 8 at another school, and then 9, 10, 11, 12. So between like year 5 to year 11, 6 years, I was at 5 different schools. And it was just from moving from high school to college and so forth, and primary school to high school. I had to change schools anyway, but I had to meet new people and I had to learn how to create new friends. And on top of that, I also played multiple sports. So every single time I moved, I actually had to meet new people in sports. So I had to learn, how do I make friends? And that both served in my adult life as a blessing and also as a curse in many ways. That's for another video. But first and second, now you also have a third, which is called a longing quadrant. And a longing quadrant means it's something that you're usually always wanting to develop. I'm trying to look after myself. I'm trying to follow a plan. I'm wanting to do this. I've been really thinking about doing X. Every time I do this, it sort of falls apart or I fall off the band. This is longing, like whatever I'm doing, it's always around the corner, right? I'm almost there. This is what we call a longing quadrant. And in coaching, it's usually what people think they come into coaching for one thing, and it's not that thing. They come in usually because of what's going on in their longing quadrant, because they feel like they don't have X and they don't know why. And what's interesting around this is that if people have problems in the longing quadrant or the next one, which is called a blocked quadrant, a blind spot, if they have issues in those quadrants, and I'll give you an example in a second, they'll try and fix it with their dominant quadrant. So if somebody has an issue with a relationship and they're not very good, right? They're either longing or they've got a blind spot when it comes to relationship, and they've got a driver when it comes to doing things, they'll start to try and do things for the person in the relationship, not check, actually go, hey, can I just ask you a question? I feel like something's off. Is everything okay? Do you feel comfortable telling me? Rather than actually checking in and asking the person, they're just like, oh, the person's off. I know, I'll just do these things for them. And so they're trying to do the relationship through their primary quadrant. And it's a really fascinating thing when being able to learn these frameworks and be able to step back and look at these frameworks. It becomes an exceptionally useful framework. Once again, it's usually the movement that can get in the way of these, beautiful bodies of work. So that's an example of the quadrants. One really powerful thing, I'm going to tell you a story with this as well. One really powerful thing with the quadrants is that there's also this quadrant like pronoun hygiene that goes with it. And so from a first person, it's language like I, me, my. A second quadrant language is like we, our, let's. The third quadrant is do, it's you. When I say you need to do this. Well, when you get home, this is what happens to you and you just have to do. It's factual, right? Third quadrant is factual. It's evidence-based. So if I actually talk about my experience as a you, I'm making it factual as if it's truth for everyone. And then we've got it's sitting in like a plural version of you and it's in the fourth quadrant. Now, the reason why this is really important is because more often than not, the way that people communicate will tell you exactly which quadrants they're dominant in and which ones they're missing. And one of the ways to do this is start to hear for their quadrant hygiene. And so I ran a workshop at a gym for their trainers a few years ago now. It was actually a two-day training. And I remember one of the guys, and he's a really quiet guy. If you're familiar with the Enneagram, he leans into what's called a type 9, which is a peacemaker. And they're really good at sort of sitting back and being mediators to some degree and not commonly forward with their perspectives and opinions. He was a brother of the gym owner. Lovely guy. And he said he was quiet up until the second afternoon after going through some of the Enneagram work. And he said Enneagram is a personality type indicator that we use, just as a clarification. And he then finally had some input, and he goes, yeah, when you look at this stuff and you use it and you can see it in other people, it's really powerful and you can see how it can help other people. And I said, could you hear that? We've already gone through the pronoun hygiene. He's like, yes. I go, would you like to try it again? He goes, yes. Floor is yours. I think that the Enneagram is really useful for me and he just was stuttering, and he struggled to literally communicate his first person perspective because he'd been hiding behind this idea that he can have a shared perspective, but if he probably had his own perspective, and I didn't dig into it at all, that he would be shunned or wronged or not loved or something along those lines. And so it's this really profound tool of actually listening for your own language. I remember another example of being on a call. It was a coaching room call, and Jay, the facilitator, asked, how is everyone going with buddy coaching? It was a practice that we had to get into. We have to set up coaching with other buddies and go through that process. And one of the guys who we actually called forward, a guy called Dan, he goes, Dan, how are you going with it? He and Dan goes, unmutes his microphone. It's online, and he goes, yes, it's not really happening at the moment. So I'll, we'll see how it goes. And then went to move on. Someone else went to talk, and Jay goes, let's just pause for a moment. Dan, it doesn't happen. Because what Dan was doing is saying it, which is a third quadrant language. It is not happening, rather than I haven't set any up yet. It's not going to happen, mate. You have to actually do it. So the difference there is being able to go, if Dan goes, hey Jay, I haven't actually set any training up yet. I haven't prioritized it. I've had a few things going on that I've prioritized instead. However, I am interested in doing it. I just give me a week and I will make sure that I turn my attention back to that when I can do it fully. That is a response where he's actually owning his behavior and what's going on, as opposed to just making it external out there. It's not happening, right? How's training going? Oh, it's not happening. Of course it's not fucking happening. What are you doing with it? So if you can become skilled in listening to the quadrant hygiene, it can fundamentally change how you understand and interact with really yourself. All of this first, I didn't explain this and I should have. Apply this to yourself first. Massively. Huge. Apply it to yourself first. And then listen to it with other people. You can invite other people into it, but I know in NLP they go, don't go NLPing on people, which is pretty good advice. So, look, that's the quadrants. Most people over-focus on one quadrant, right? It becomes a driver. Real growth requires engaging all four. Now, I do apologize. There is mechanics next door, so if you can hear some drilling, that is what you're hearing, because I'm in my office at the gym. There's two things here that I love to speak to. One's called trajectory and one's called traction. I look at trajectory as principles and look at traction as protocols. And we need both. And so trajectory is what happens initially. So a change can happen in an instant, and that is the trajectory. And it's like a golf ball with a millimeter change. But I mean, down the fairway, you see a difference, but initially you don't. It's like an airplane, a couple of degrees left or right ends up hours later being in completely different countries. And so your trajectory is crucial, but you need traction as well. And so the powerful thing here, the trajectory is associated with being able to develop to see all perspectives equally. Not about equality, it's more about what's contextually appropriate, but it's about understanding and knowing that all four quadrants are all occurring. Then we have the actual traction, which is engaging in practices in the quadrants that maybe you're not as strong in. Now, I haven't mentioned this. There's a link in the description. I actually have an 8-question assessment. It's what I borrowed from the coaching room, and it'll give you an indication of what your driver native perspective would be and what your blind perspective would be, and some practices that you can do from there as well. So it's a free test, takes 3 minutes. You can just do it, links in the bio somewhere. But either way, that gives you an idea of what your native perspective might be and what you might be lagging in, so to speak, what you might be undervaluing, even though it's still occurring. So, really important. So a couple of principles I want to leave you with. All four perspectives are true but partial. And so that means that even if you have a dominant perspective on something, it's probably true. It just may be missing other information. And so it's always worth asking the question, what am I missing here? It's a self-reflexive question that allows you to start to really open up your own flexibility of thinking that can engage in different ways that you can solve a particular problem or see a particular situation. Due to them being true but partial, it means all four quadrants are occurring and developing through the stages. And developing through the stages allows for greater perspective. Now, that's called tetra-arising, because tetra-arising, like I mentioned earlier, is all four quadrants are continually occurring. And they occur through, so in Dan's video, he talked about AQAL, AQAL, which is all quadrants, all lines. It's actually another one called all levels. And then there's all states. It really is interesting. And states and stages, which I'll mention shortly, are two different things. But here's a principle that I want to offer you that has been profound in my understanding and learning. And it was from a guy called Joseph, who is one of the directors of the coaching room. And it was, I kind of remember the context of what we're talking about in the learnings and trainings at the time, but I remember him saying this and it was just like, that's beautiful. And what it was learn all the sheet music, then throw the sheets away and play music. And so all of these models are beautiful in their own right, but they're just models. They're not reality. Jung said it in a different way, where he's like, learn all of the models, but when you meet a human, be another human. And that is fundamental for the absolute peaks of our capacity to experience the human experience, the heights of the human experience, the love, the joy, the sadness, the sorrow, the grieving, that every part, everything that we have access to as a human, we deserve to experience. So you can't just turn one off because you turn all of them off. So learn the sheet music, then throw the sheets away and play music. Just be another human. All right, some protocols for you. I've already mentioned there's a free native perspective assessment. You learn and lean into the quadrants you otherwise struggle to access. So that's one of the things where I'm learning off my father-in-law as a 36-year-old man. I feel like I'm learning to be a teenager again, but I feel like there's parts of me as a boy, and I haven't told him this, one day I will, that are somewhat being healed by doing that type of work in a way as well. So it's this weird bind that I didn't know I probably needed as a 36-year-old man, but there's some honesty. But that's one. And another example of that is that I've leaned into people like Ali Abdaal, who's got a lot to do with productivity and a lot to do with systemic approach to work. Even Dan Martell, who is like Buy Back Your Time, which is about systems and scaling and structure. And then a big part of me is actually going, how do I switch off the thinking and the really the dreaming and the vision and just get shit done? And so even working with companies like Dent, so Daniel Priestley's company called Dent Global, which literally they call it a GSD, which is Get Shit Done, and IP and frameworks. And so there's some examples where I've gone, right, how do I get better at learning and understanding all of these things that are in areas that I'm not so good at? And doing so has fundamentally helped me develop the capacity to communicate my inner reality and my thoughts and insights and connect with people on a far greater level. So if you're really good at certain quadrants, lean into the ones that you're not so good at and find people to learn from. Here's a couple of examples for you. If you aren't so good at your upper left, journal and use I, me, my language. Being able to do that, and it doesn't even have to be written. You can do it verbally if you want to, but journaling in I, me, my language is going to be profound and just whatever comes out. So there's a lady called Julia Cameron. She's got a book called The Artist's Way, and she talks about morning pages, which is effectively a 3-page brain drain. That is how I would recommend people to start. Just brain drain. Whatever's there, just write it down. I don't know what to write. Fucking look at you go. How good is that? You're starting. Write that down. So either way, journaling is great for an upper left practice. Lower left practice is ask questions and listen. One of the things, there's 4 levels of listening. I'm going to actually go into this for a sec. So there's 4 levels of listening, and I'm going to go through questions on another video, but there's 4 levels of listening. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And people commonly stop at number 2. They think that number 2 is the highest, and they call it active listening or saying, and that's not it at all. So number 4 is download listening. Download is where you are taking on information. However, it's kind of like sitting in the background. And so this is where you might know certain songs and lyrics of songs, so you've heard them on the radio so often, or if you're at a cafe, you know there's conversations happening around you, but you're just not really listening. But yeah, the easiest example is when you hear a jingle come on and you know the words, but you never sat down there and gone, okay, I'm going to learn this jingle for this phone company that I've never purchased anything from. So that's called download listening. And it can be useful sitting on a bus rather than trying to take in all the information from everyone. You're just downloading what's going on and, focusing on what you're focusing on. That's fine. The next one here is we're going to call it factual listening. And what this means is that you're going to listen for things that are factual for you. It sounds a little bit more like fractional listening, but factual listening is you're at that cafe and you hear someone talk about, I was listening to this Ken Wilber video. And all of a sudden, you didn't hear anything that person said beforehand, but now that they've said that, you've just switched on to that. You were downloading prior to that, but now you're tuning into their conversation. That's factual listening. And so something that's relevant for you is where you'll then start to tune in. And then you've got number 2, which is known as empathic or relational listening, and it's where you're actually relating to the person. Now, people usually think this is the highest level, and it's not. Relational level listening is important. You probably do it with friends. I teach this stuff at the immersions, and I use the example when people drive there together, they carpool, they're usually in some form of relational listening the way. They're just engaging and asking and relating to each other and really just building rapport, which is great. But there is another level higher. I wasn't recording the whole time. It's recording now. So there is another level higher. You got download, you got factual, you got relational, and then you have sacred. And so sacred listening, there's a couple of key things with sacred listening. One, you're not just shutting the fuck up, you're shutting up here. You are absolutely fully taking on everything the person's saying and what they're not saying. So if you were listening through the quadrants, you're listening for the areas that they're talking about, but also the areas they're not saying. And I'm going to give you an example of that before I finish. But not just that, you're listening for any changes, listening as in with your body for any changes in their energetic signature, with their cheeks, does their breathing change, does their body language change when they say certain things. I was talking to a lady the other day and she's like, "Have you been?" And I was like, "Yeah, good, just had a head cold this week and a few other things." And I said, "How about you?" She's like, "Oh yeah, no." She started to move. Yep, it's good. Yep, okay, I'll see you later. I was like, "Are you okay?" She's like, "Yep," and was stormed right out of there. So I sent her a message and followed up with her after a little while, because there was something there that she didn't. It was clearly that was an obvious example. But if you can start to listen to the subtle things that people are not saying, that is the profound change, right? And inquire into that. The questions asked themselves rather than going there with an agenda of how it should happen. So that's called sacred listening. So sorry for not filming up before. You've got download, you've got factual, you've got relational, then you've got sacred. Now, here's something cool I'm going to show you. So do with the quadrants, and then we're going to move on. So with the quadrants here, let's just go I, we, it, it's. Remember, okay? Individual, collective, objective, subjective, okay? When I'm talking with someone, let's say we're in a business meeting, I'm listening for what quadrant they're actually saying and what quadrant they're not saying. So for an example, if I hear someone go, let's rub those off because I'm going to actually mark it for you. If I hear someone go, "I've been thinking about what we should do and I think we should just get after it and be the first person on the market," right? What I haven't potentially heard outside of market, because market exists here, is about a plan or about what other people think. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm just saying I haven't heard that yet. I've heard what they have said. I have heard what they haven't said. And so unless they can continue to go, "I've spoken to the whole team and everyone seems to be on the same page. We think we should go be the first to the market with this, and this is our plan to do so," then I'm pretty much covered the majority of the quadrants, right? Within reason. But if I hear people go, "I don't know what's holding us back. We should just be the first." All I'm hearing is this: "I don't know what's holding us back." Well, have you spoken to anyone, right? What's the plan on actually getting there, and what's the plan if it doesn't work? So our ability to actually listen through the quadrants is profound when it comes to actually anything from, of course, a business conversation, but what we might be missing in any problems that we have. And so one of the ways that we do this, and I actually do this at the immersion as well, is that we walk people through the quadrants. So I will facilitate it, but they present with a problem, usually they have with another person, and I will literally walk them through the quadrants, and I'll be like, "Why is it a problem for you?" And we'll find out what the problem behind the problem is. Like, why is that problem a problem for you? And then from there, we move into a second person, looking at first person and going, so if you were to that person looking at David, in this case, what would they see that maybe David isn't? And so we're moving into the second quadrant to look back at the person that has the original problem. And we're doing our best to step into there. Obviously, we're not going to ask that person in reality. We're playing a practice here. And then we move on to third quadrant after doing that. After asking them, what can you see from second quadrant? And we go, being objective to this and looking at Dave and Sally, why is there a problem here? And also, what can you see from both parties objectively? Now, here's what's fascinating. As people walk through here, this is where they get emotional. In their upper left, in their individual quadrant, they can still get a little bit emotional here, but it's usually empathetic. And then when they move to third quadrant, there's no emotion. The person starts to speak factually because they're actually now getting literally objective to it. And then we look at going, great, so if this was to continue play out, how would that affect the system? How would that affect the community? How would that affect their health? And how would that affect the actual person's mental health? And then we start to take a whole complete perspective of it. So that's a way you can use the quadrants literally today to be able to walk through any of your problems. You're welcome. All right. I'm going to do my best. That took a little bit longer than I thought, but I'm going to do my best to go through Ken Wilber's stages. Now, looking at the quadrants, exceptionally useful, and it does map across the stages of consciousness as well. Now, Ken Wilber's work here is actually off the back of a bunch of other different bodies of work. Just turning that camera off. So Ken Wilber's work with the stages of consciousness is off the back of a lot of other individuals' bodies of work, especially when it comes to the vertical development, like Maslow's hierarchies. There's another guy called Claire Graves that did spiral dynamics. You've got Robert Kegan with his thinking quotient. And what's profound is that the identity compass that I'll go through later actually maps across your stage of development, your vertical stage of development in Robert Kegan's thinking quotient. And another body of work called awareness quotient, which is Dr. Darren Stevens' work, who did his PhD on the identity compass. So there's some pretty cool stuff there. But when it comes to Wilber's stages, and I'm going to show you, Cullen's going to post up a little diagram for you, and it's going to show you, yes, there's colors, of course, and the idea of colors is that it shows you that one's not better than the other. It's just stages. It's like saying year 3 at school is worse than year 8 at school. It's just stages. It's just that people go through these stages, and at some point in their life, they might stay in year 6. And that's not worse or better. It's just what they choose, and for a whole variety of different reasons. So it's not good and bad. One of the worst things that happens with these stage development things, they're seen as good and bad, rather than just earlier and later. That's all. Earlier and later. So quadrants show us perspectives, but they don't tell us the depth of how we can start to really develop our perspectives. But what's funny enough, and this is where Dan spoke about pre-modern, modern, post-modern, and integral stages, is that they actually go through the quadrants. So your pre-modern stage, which is usually egocentric and ethnocentric thinking, and let's talk mostly ethnocentric because that's an amber stage, is actually I'm going to press record again because I'm going to draw for you. Let's go back to the quadrants. I'm going to show you where it fits in. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. And you look at this, and your pre-modern, your egocentric is usually a dominant first-person perspective. They're after me, the pigs are after me, the cops are after me, the world's big and bad, and everyone's like out to get you. Got a dog-eat-dog world. Like, it's all a first-person perspective, dominant. Like, they struggle to see far more perspectives of how things fit together. That's egocentric. Ethnocentric is a we space, right? If that's in me and I space, it's usually me, then this is a we space. Whereas now we start to see people shift onto things of religion or AAs, or even like I see people go, oh, CrossFit saved my life. And what they're saying there is just the physical components to it, of course, but also the community. So it becomes a we space of shared values, and people start to then associate with that. It's not to say that religion is a lower thing or whatever. It's just to say that that's commonly where people go to, is that they go to a shared space of values. AA meetings, it could be a whole range of different things. Spirituality still can fit within there, but that's where it fits with there. And then we start to go into the third quadrant when we look at modern, which is rational and scientific, because we're looking at parts, but we're looking at it, right? And this is what's really interesting here, is that this is where your productivity, which is your effort and energy, efficiency, all exists here. And so people commonly go then, art versus science, right? Religion versus science, all that kind of stuff. They're seeing it from different perspectives. First, second, and third perspective. And then you look at the postmodern, which is relativistic, or it's inclusion, pluralism. It's like everything has to fit equally. This is where equality is, and this is where systemic thinking is. But it's actually all of this that's really crucial, because your integral theory, your integral stage of development is a fifth perspective, which is including all 4 perspectives, as opposed to having a dominant perspective. And so all it's getting there is that individuals that maybe value certain things and are dominant in certain areas end up showing where they may be in certain lines of intelligence across the all quadrants, all lines, all levels, bodies of work. So that's how it fits in within the quadrants, by the way. And he uses different words for it. I'm going to show you a couple of different bodies of work. It's going to show up on the screen. But you've also got someone like Claire Graves. I'm going to get his book. I'm not sure if you can see. Can you see little Pete down there? A little schnauzer. All right. So this is Don Beck and Chris Cowan, Spiral Dynamics. And within Spiral Dynamics, it's based off Claire Graves' work, which is around like mastering values, leadership, and change. It's around values, right? So his work is based around values, and it's really, really profound. It's worth reading if you're interested in this. Yes, it's very hard to scientifically validate, because when we look at values, we're looking in something, not at it. Scientific approach is commonly looking at something. We want to see the brain. It's hard to look in the mind. Very different things. So Spiral Dynamics is one of the works. Robert Kegan's work, which is the Evolving Self. That's another version of a vertical development model, and it's measuring how we think. And then you've got Piaget, which is childhood development. You've got a few other versions there, but also like ones like Dr. Darren Stevens and so forth. And there's many more that I haven't studied whatsoever at all. But what I'm getting at here is that Wilber's work is mapping across all of those bodies of work rather than just one. And so it becomes a really profound way to approach those bodies of work, but also to understand how we may have more of a psychograph to things, which is we might be more dominant and well developed in one line of intelligence, values or thinking or Maslow's hierarchy, for example, and may have other areas where maybe we're not as developed. That's all it is. It's just developed. And so where this gets caught up is when we're saying this is better than this and this is worse than that, as opposed to being like, well, and this is one of Wilber's beautiful quotes, a truly inclusive society will include everyone at all stages, as opposed to the rejection of what's better and what's worse. It's kind of like what's contextually appropriate. So the levels of consciousness, there's different ways that you can gauge and assess. There's different sort of speaking assessments and so forth, but this is across multiple bodies of work. I'll show you. All right. So in his book, Integral Psychology, which is just one of, gives credence to a bunch of multiple bodies of work and how they map across vertically. I know you can't really see that, so to speak, but if you get the book, you'll get an understanding of it. And all it is more so going, here's what's useful, use it accordingly, and here's what he's seeing map across each other, as opposed to going, you need to be doing this, and this is better than this, and so forth. Use it as a map to understand yourself and reality better. And if it's not as useful for you, then by all means throw it out. But that's the way that we're looking at the stages of consciousness. And I've seen it, maybe there's a bias within me that's seeing it, but I've seen it map across multiple different examples after understanding it on greater depth. So your stages of consciousness are great, but once again, learn all the models, but when you meet another human, just be another human. So the stages of consciousness, I'm not going to go into crazy amounts now because it is like quite a large body of work that I don't want to, it's hard sort of going down one angle when you can spend so much time down there. If you've got questions, chuck them in the comments, and I'll be doing my best to make sure I make all my responses relevant for it as well. But the actual stages of development across many different bodies of work are useful, but they're right and incomplete. Please continue to take that approach and understand that they're right and incomplete. And your own approach to it is actually the only useful one. So that's what I'd recommend. Let's have a look at a couple of examples here though. So going back on postmodern, modern, pre-modern and so forth, there's other names for that Wilber refers to, but I'm going to continue off the back, and you'll see it in the diagram that Cullen put up, but I'm going to continue off the back of Dan's work and call them that as well. So when it comes to business, pre-modern would be, we've always done it that way. We have always done it that way. So that's what you're doing, right? That's a pre-modern, that is a we space. It is what's called as an amber or an ethnocentric approach. The modern approach is we're going to optimize metrics. This is what's called in Claire Graves' space as a strive drive. This is where we're looking at efficiency and data and productivity. So we're going to look at data and results that matter. Postmodern is everyone's voice matters. And so this is now looking at not just what's the individual data, now we're looking at what is the egalitarian equality of everyone having their own voice and making sure that it's as equal as everyone else's. So that's your green, it's called mean green, funnily enough, for a whole variety of reasons. Whereas integral is like, how do we integrate this information and make it relevant based upon our goals, the targets, and the greater good of the whole ecosystem. And so it's integrating all of those things as opposed to rejecting certain parts of it. As an athlete, the pre-modern version is like the coach is God. So whatever the coach says, I'm going to do that. I don't want to get in trouble, all of that sort of stuff. It's sort of like this sort of ethnocentric of like, we're the athletes and he's the coach. It's this hierarchy of sorts. Modern is, I'm going to optimize based on metrics, and the coach can build culture around this, but people are at different stages. And I'll give you another example of this shortly. Postmodern is, we're going to balance it with mental health. So we're going to be, yes, physical, but we're also going to look at well-being. That's where I step in. Integral is we're going to integrate all of the above. So we're going to look at not necessarily that coach is God, but that there is actually levels to this. We're going to look at getting the data of it as well. I'm going to make sure we're balancing mental health based upon what's required for our actual goal and how we're going to get there and by what time and in what way. And so looking at trajectory and traction here, recognizing your stage is a mental shift, right? To go, okay, this is where I'm at. It just is what it is. But practicing and actually taking action, it's interesting because one of the ways that we really develop greater perspectives isn't necessarily by trying to actually be more or do more. It's actually unbecoming things that we're not. And so it's letting go of old behaviors, values, frames of reference that probably served us when we were younger, but are kind of keeping us tied to the past, even if we're not aware of it. And that's where coaching and developmental work comes into play, because it allows us to see certain intentions and values that we once held that we're still holding on to that maybe don't serve us the same way anymore. So that's understanding the stage of where you're at is not good or bad. It is just where you're at. The path of self-development is one worthy of walking down, and there's no real wrong way to do it. It's just a matter of making sure that you are allowing yourself to fumble within the balance of building out your own path while taking on the feedback of other people's. Or not, it's up to you. So, a couple of things here. Principle, growth is vertical. Not all perspectives are equal, but it's more about thinking it that they're not all what's contextually appropriate is the biggest thing. Someone having a different perspective is not wrong or bad or good. There's balance to this, because it's like, well, when does that become deadly and then becomes bad? Things of that nature. But as a general rule, we're looking at it going, they're just different perspectives. The protocols here is to be able to identify at your own stage. Now, that's an interesting one. The identity compass actually helps with that a little bit. I'm going to talk through that. I'm going to introduce it today for a bunch of reasons, rather than going on a deep dive on it. If you want more information on it, let me know and I'll do a bigger deep dive on it. But the protocols here, really more than anything, is to be able to self-reflect, get people around you that can give you feedback on the stages and how you're communicating, the actual behaviors and action of study and work. And so where your practices are based on your quadrants is a good place to start. And then what are the frameworks and systems and what are the environments that I'm getting in that allow me to actually develop in a way that's true and honest for me. They're your protocols. All right. So the last one that I promised was Arne Maus's Identity Compass and Michael Hall's Meta Programs. Now, quick story there, and from my understanding, Arne was a student of Michael's, I think back in the 90s, and he went and developed the Identity Compass. Now, Cullen, my main man, is going to put up a little diagram there. It's actually a measurement of someone's, like a snapshot of someone's identity compass. And you'll see there's all these little bars across the screen and all that sort of stuff. And there's different, what they're called cognitive intentions, right? You see visual, auditory, things of that nature, primary interest. And what this is basically showing is how much value someone holds behind a particular pattern of thinking. And the higher the value on something, so balance is about 55%. The higher the value on something means that it's more of a driver. So anything about 65% and over is a driver of how that person thinks. Anything 45 and under means there's not really valuing how that person thinks. And the reason why this is really important is because these clustered together can point to our personality structures. And then that can point to how we're actually getting in our own way of showing up to our potential and really showing up in a way that actually allows us to grab a greater perspective and be flexible and adaptable to situations and showing up contextually appropriate. That's where real power comes in, because you've got power of choice rather than power of habit. Habit's good, but I'm talking about showing up habitually, reactionary. It's not even a word, reactionary. There you go. In a way where we're treating this situation the same as maybe a situation when I was 14, whereas I'm 36 and I'm responding as a 14-year-old. So the way that we become present is by moving through these stages. And the thing that Arne saw that Michael didn't, so this is off the back of Michael Hall's body of work. His book is Figuring Out People, Reading People Using Meta Programs, and it is fantastic word art. However, it's an exceptionally interesting read as you go through. Michael Hall's one of the guys that I studied under. And then Arne Maus did Figuring Out People, which is based on the identity compass. So Michael Hall's system is more subjective. You learn to listen for certain patterns of thinking and inquire into certain patterns of thinking and what you're actually looking and listening for. Whereas Arne's work is actually you answer a set of questions, and you only do that, access that test through a facilitator, and it gives you a really, really in-depth printout of basically the value that you hold on particular patterns of thinking. So we can show you, like, to a T what your blind spots are. Now, the reason why this is also really important and beneficial, and Cowan's going to put up another snapshot, and this shows what's called your AQ and your TQ scores. And this is your vertical development. And so because Dr. Darren Stevens' work with awareness quotient, and because it measures it across Robert Kegan's work, which is thinking quotient, it can give you an indication of maybe where you are across those vertical development bodies of work. And it's going to show not your height of that, not your best state experience that you can experience in those lines. It's going to show you probably where you fall under stress based on your answers. So it's going to be somewhat restrictive, but at the same time guiding in a way of being able to assess your vertical development. Use it as a tool, not as the truth. Use all of these things as a tool, not as a truth. So what is a metaprogram or a cognitive intention? A thinking pattern. It is a filter, a perceptual filter that we hold. An example is like motivation towards, motivation away. And when in reality, we want to balance both. But if we have someone who's high motivation towards, they might be really, really good at going, this is what I want. They pull towards it. There's this, love for it. They want to achieve something. It's going to be great when we get there. But there's not enough pain. There's a lot of pull, but not enough pain to move from where they are, that they never really get traction, right? They got trajectory, but not traction. Whereas someone who's got a lot of motivation away and not a lot of motivation towards, they're going to have a lot of traction, but no trajectory, because they want to move away from where they are, but they're not ever really sure where they want to go. And so the balance here is actually having access to both. It's not about one being better than the other, although there may be certain situations where a pattern of thinking like this, it leans more into one way or the other being maybe beneficial, like options and procedures, as opposed to motivation towards and away. But you'll start to get this gauge of like, these are all like lenses that we put on, and it filters how we experience reality, because we don't see reality as it is. We see reality as we are. And these perceptual filters filter that for us, and they create personality structures. And the whole approach of this is not that you are your personality, it's that personality gets in the way of who you are. And so really being able to understand that and peel that back and take these glasses off and see different perspectives is where we see significant growth in individuals, and growth and understanding in their flexibility as well. So your identity compass is an exceptional tool. It has to be used and done through a facilitator. The test itself is through me, it's a $250 test. I'm not doing that to sell it. I'm giving you an idea that that's literally what I get charged for my clients to do it. On the other side of that, it's a profound test. It's exceptionally useful, and every single one of my clients, whether it be at an immersion or whether it be one-on-one or within a coaching program or in my peak community, they do the identity compass, and we use it for a self-diagnosis tool of understanding and certain practices to move forward on. So the powerful thing here with all of these bodies of work is that they overlap. In fact, your thinking patterns and your identity compass actually fit within the upper left of the quadrants. Now, the reason being is because it's how we structure our thinking. If you go back on how I said quality NLP before is the study of the structure of subjective experience. And this helps us map that out. And the difficulty is that it's hard to map out scientifically what is subjective in nature. So we want to use maps that are up to date and relevant and useful, but they're near reality models. They're not the actual reality. And that's a really important thing to remember. So team, this went a little bit longer than I had anticipated. It's my longest YouTube video so far that I made for YouTube. I hope you found value in this. I hope it helped to speak to those models a little bit more. If you're interested in learning any more on any of this sort of stuff, one of two things, comment below and I'll do some more content and videos on the stuff that you are interested in learning more on. Two, I run through all of this and way more in my peak community. It's a 16-week peak program, and it teaches you about your body, yourself, your food, and your time, and how to optimize and be efficient through all of those areas. Now, not just that, it's a 16-week program that I run 3 times a year that if you sign up, you get lifetime access to. It's not me here necessarily selling it, but if you're interested in it, then there's going to be a link below that you can click and you can find out more information on it. But either way, that's me done. I'm out. Until next time, peace and pizza. I'll see you soon.